Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and Happy New Year as well. I hope you're all doing very well. It's a pleasure and a joy to continue making these videos for the next year, and I can't wait to see what happens, so let's get into it. So today's video is about a topic that I get quite often, and actually I had a conversation with a friend who just started composing, and they asked me for some advice about, how do I start? It's very overwhelming. What do I do? So this video is about really what do I do to compose? How do I compose, and how do I continue to do so without feeling overwhelmed by the gravity of it all, because it's quite a huge topic, and I'm gonna hopefully try to break it down for you and kind of show you what I did to start progressing more as a professional composer, if I can call myself that. So let's start with tip number one, which is to start small. And I mentioned this tip all the time in some other videos, but starting small is one of the most important things that you can do to start composing without having such a heavy burden over yourself, because there's a million things you could do to compose. There's so many different styles, genres, and things you can do, and different settings that you can do as a composer. So starting small, and what I recommend is composing for your own instrument. That's one really good way to start small, since writing for like a symphony orchestra instrumentation is really it's very, very overwhelming to the beginning composer, because there's so many different instruments, there's so many things to worry about harmonically, and how do I write for something like that, or even like a quartet of some kind. That can also be quite a lot to the beginning composer. So I recommend starting with your own primary instrument. For me, that's piano, whatever it may be for you. So write a solo for your instrument, and we'll explain why that's a good idea later down in this video. But writing for your own instrument, all the ranges, the tessitura, which is kind of where you're comfortable in that range. How to write for it idiomatically, because if there's a certain passage or run or scale that's more difficult to do, you can write something that's a little more manageable and something that would be fun to play. So write for your own instrument. That's what I recommend for starting small. Step number two is to get inspired. Now, there are many different ways to get inspired. For me, I like to input as much music as possible from other composers to get me to write something that I like that's kind of similar to what I hear. For example, I like listening to some of my favorite composers on Spotify, for example, or on YouTube when there's these score videos. Whether it be classical music like Beethoven, which I love Beethoven, to a little more late romantic, so Mahler, and then newer composers that are still alive, like Eric Whitacre, for example. Those are all different types of composers and different styles that I kind of all input to create my own voice. And I recommend trying to input as much music as you can in your own writing, so that you can implement things that you hear in your own music, and then overall you'll enjoy more of what you write. I recommend searching for new styles and new types of music constantly. It doesn't have to be strictly classical music, it can be of any genre, but for academic sake, I do try to stay more towards classical music. So try to explore new things, styles that you've never really listened to before, like contemporary classical music, or listening to something that's not Western music, maybe something from something Eastern. Trying to input different styles will let your subconscious mind kind of think of these things in the background, and then you'll subconsciously add these to your own pieces as you write them. And continue to score study. This is a really important tip that I talk about a lot as well. There are many thousands of score videos now uploaded to YouTube, with good recordings that you can just watch and see. Follow the score obviously, and see what you like, and see how the composer is effective at doing what they do. So I'm always watching score videos. It's kind of an unhealthy obsession, but I think it's very beneficial. And always listen. This is a very good way to continue to input a lot of different styles of music and different composers, is to just listen constantly. Usually the Spotify algorithm is good enough to recommend me new music that I've never listened to. And that in turn helps me become a better composer over the long run. Tip number three is to learn some musical basics. If you're starting from complete scratch and you've never really been exposed to music growing up, then learning some basics of music theory, ear training, and things like that can go a long way. And I know there might be some pushback against doing that because, music theories traditionally taught with the fundamentals of the common practice period and Western music, which is arguable whether that's the right way of viewing music, and I don't think it is. Western music today is very influenced by these practices, so I think many musicians have this as a solid background to get you to start writing, so I think it's a good way to start. There are many different tutorials and videos on the basics of music theory. Just watch any of Rick Beato's videos and you'll get some ideas. This is just a tip reserved for people that are absolute beginners of, starting to write music and composing. I think it's a good way to start. But then once you learn some of these things, you can kind of expand and go away from that and start breaking some of the rules actually. So start with learning them and then you can break them later. On the topic of these musical basics, learn how to read sheet music and notation if you haven't already. It's a very useful skill as a musician in general to learn how to read sheet music and how to actually write it on staff paper. So I'm an advocate for writing by hand, so if you can buy yourself some staff paper and then learn how to properly write the clefs, the note heads, and how to notate things and beaming and all these things, that can go a long way, and it kind of helps develop your craft. Okay, we're going to go on to tips that are a little more advanced, things that you might want to do once you've kind of mastered some of the beginning tips that I mentioned. But tip number 4 is to study orchestration. Studying orchestration is very beneficial to becoming a more well-rounded composer and to improve your craft. Studying orchestration is one of the things that I've only recently have gotten really invested in. So I've recently bought Samuel Adler's The Study of Orchestration, which is actually on my desk over there. But yeah, orchestration allows you to learn about different instruments, their ranges, tessitura, timbres, and things like that, so you can write more effectively and more idiomatically for that instrument. And idiomatically basically means writing it comfortably and for that instrument so that it's very suitable and not uncomfortable. So orchestration can be learned in a lot of different ways. Again, there are a lot of free websites. There's a website called Andrew Hugel something orchestration website. I'll link it down below. It's a very useful website that's free and has a lot of good information, but I recommend buying an orchestration book like Samuel Adler's just to have it on your desk to reference whenever you want. And the best part about learning orchestration is that you can begin to write for larger ensembles and to write for them more effectively. If you want to write for a wind ensemble, concert band, orchestra, these things, knowing how all the instruments work is very important, so you don't write something that's impossible to play. And then this in turn allows you to become a more well-rounded composer in general. Tip number 5 is something you could do as a beginning composer as well, but is to improvise on your instrument. I'm sure many of you who are already musically inclined already improvise on your instrument, and that is basically what you call composing. But if you don't already improvise, it is a really good way to learn, to implement the skills that you've learned in like music theory, and apply it to doing it on the spot, which is something that is kind of a lost art these days. Improvising kind of allows you to free yourself from thinking too hard at something on pen and paper and to just be a little more expressive. And if I'm having writer's block, just improvising is a nice way to free up kind of the mental fog that I have. So just play around and see what you like, and I recommend writing it down on staff paper nearby. And you don't have to write a whole piece, obviously, just get some ideas. Some harmonies is usually what I use my instrument for. I primarily use my piano to experiment with harmonies and to create more of the sonic atmosphere of what the piece is. And that is a very useful thing, and it's very hard to do with just pen and paper. It's hard for me to visualize and imagine complex sounds without a piano, so hopefully later down the line I can start moving away from the piano, but for now it's a very useful skill. The next tip is to develop your musical ideas. And this is more of an advanced tip just because when I started out I didn't really have an idea what I was doing. I was kind of just writing down ideas and just sticking with it and not really seeing how like a whole piece kind of fits together and how it's all connected. So developing your musical ideas allows you to kind of recycle ideas you started with and then to develop them later in the piece so that it's all a cohesive unit and kind of just makes sense together instead of just adding as many ideas as possible. A very popular way of doing this is to just reharmonize over your melody. So let's say you composed a melody, you have very basic chords. You can, for example, add extended harmonies like ninths, sevenths, and things like that to make it sound a little more jazzy, for example, or basically do what Jacob Collier does and just keep on adding these extended tertian harmonies. You can do quartal, quintal harmonies, which are based on adding fourths and fifths. Reharmonizing your melodies is just a good way to spice up what you have and to make it something a little bit different. My favorite method, and a very common one that you would learn in second year music theory class, is to use motivic and thematic development techniques. So these techniques are just ways to take a basic idea, musical idea like a motif or melody, and to transform it in several different ways. Some examples are through diminution, which is shortening your melody, the rhythmic value, or augmentation, which is lengthening it. You can truncate it, which is just cutting in half, and things like that. These are just really simple techniques that you can use, and I talk about it all in my video up here, linked above, about these techniques. And if you want to learn how they work and all the ones that I use and ones that you probably should know, there's a video about that, so I really recommend checking that out after this one. And if you're working with a larger piece, think about taking your musical idea and reorchestrating it to another instrument or another section. You could change the range of it, you can change the dynamics, and things like that. Just gives it a little more flair. And again, the overall idea of developing your ideas is to make your piece sound more cohesive. Okay, this next step is one of the most important ones, and it's to get your pieces performed as much as possible. And especially as a beginning composer, it's really important to actually have your pieces performed by real instruments, by real musicians. I found it a life-changing experience to get my pieces actually performed by acoustic instruments compared to just my computer MIDI sounds. It's a completely different feeling and sensation to have it actually performed. And that's why I recommend writing for your own instrument, because you can actually play it yourself. Hopefully you can play it yourself, and it makes it seem more real compared to just having the computer play it. So getting it performed by real people, or just played, not even performed, is essential to continuing to have that needed inspiration and motivation to continue writing. And the last tip is to join a community. And it's really important to join a community because composing can be pretty lonely and quite isolating. So going along the journey with other people that are in the same shoes as you, you can go on this journey together and you don't have to be alone in it. So joining a community is something that I recommend from the get-go, so you stay motivated to continue writing and to become a better composer in the long run. Some communities I recommend are the composer subreddit. r/composers is where you go, and there are so many great tips and people that are asking for feedback of their pieces. You can start discussions and promote your own music there. So people are very friendly, and they give you a lot of really pointed feedback that is essential to improving. So you can upload your music there, and people will give you great suggestions on things to hopefully improve. So I use this constantly as a composer. Another forum is youngcomposers.com, and this is a similar thing, but dedicated to composers that are just starting out. So I highly recommend joining them. It's a little dated, but people are still posting there daily, so I recommend checking it out. There's also a lot of podcasts and other resources that I haven't mentioned, and I have a link to my website where I have a list of all the ultimate resources to composers. So if you want to check out some of the YouTube channels and podcasts that I listen to related to composing, check that link out, and there will be so many tips and websites and tools that you might find useful for yourself. And lastly, this YouTube channel is hopefully a community that I'm fostering and building, and I urge you to become more involved in it. Check out some of the other videos, comment down below, and ask questions. I'm always available for questions, so you can just go to my website and contact me there, or just leave a comment down below, and I will try to give you some good advice myself. But anyways, thanks for watching, and keep writing.